board in charge of the MBTA will soon make a decision about extensive service cuts. T officials say the cuts are required by the drop in ridership and revenue related to the pandemic. The changes are described as temporary and targeting service with the least demand, but there's also concern about lasting effects. Concerns have also been raised by the Pioneer Institute, especially around other ways to get financial relief. To explain is the Institute's senior fellow, Charlie Chieppo. Thank you very much for being with us, Charlie.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the cuts themselves. I mean, it's mainly about certain lines or parts of lines where ridership is low, but it's also just pretty much pervasive, at least a smaller cutting back of service. Are you concerned about any of that?
Well, sure. I mean, look, there's nothing good about this. I mean, we are in a crisis situation. The MBTA has been running its normal schedule for, since March with, 75% fewer riders on certain modes, fewer than that. And we got some federal money for a while, so we're able to keep it up, but that's gone now. And so, yeah, look, nobody wants to cut back on service. It tends to hurt the people who have already been hurt the most by the pandemic, which are the low-income individuals.
I'm one of the people who's riding the T less than previously, but from my own observations, there are fewer people riding the T, but sometimes it feels like there are too many to feel like you can ride safely. What's your idea of a safe standard around that?
Well, that's a good question. I sort of would leave it more to the public health people on that to tell us what the answer is. I mean, clearly we cannot have a situation in which every seat is taken, in which you have people standing and breathing on each other. There's only so much that masks can do. And so that absolutely has to be a piece of the consideration here.
Of course, the other part of the consideration is that ridership, I think the last time I checked was 26%. It may have gotten somewhat worse since. And if you look at the financial consequences of that, what does that tell you?
Well, look, it tells me that we're looking at somewhere in the area of $575 million deficit this year, which is just untenable, for this coming fiscal year. And, it's really unfortunate because so much good work has been done since 2015 to actually get the T to the point where for a year or two they had balanced the budget. And it's heartbreaking to see all that undone at this point. But, particularly without any more fiscal help from the federal government, maybe now with the election done and the transition in Washington, that might be forthcoming. But clearly the MBTA cannot continue on that pace. It's just not sustainable.
Does that mean simply that you can't wait for good news from Washington, that there's some things you just got to do that would take effect in January of the coming year?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to do something, and that's why I guess the MBTA has proposed these cuts.
Now, you also had some ideas that you've been working on for several years, actually, about how the T can save money in other ways. The T has put into effect some reforms. They have saved some money, but is there much more they can do?
Yeah, look, there's a whole lot more the MBTA can do. The things that I specifically have proposed that could head off a lot of these cuts are two things. One, the MBTA pays about twice as much for its bus maintenance as other sort of similar transit agencies do, and there is there's a solution for that that's kind of hiding in plain sight, which is the model that the all 14 Massachusetts regional transit authorities use. And what they do is they contract out the maintenance. Now it's called, a lot of folks say, well, that's anti-union, you can't do that. But the reality is that all 14 of those regional transit authorities contract with companies that use union mechanics. The difference is that when you do the contracting, you actually have a situation in which you have things like repair times, standard repair times, use of software to guide, when you do preventative maintenance, all that kind of stuff. The T doesn't have any of that. And so by doing that, by introducing that stuff that's pretty much common sense everywhere else, say about $40 million in the coming year. The other thing that I would propose is simply to say that, the T has been forced to cut a lot of low ridership bus lines. And I'm most concerned with bus lines because bus lines are buses are the mode that carry the most low income people. And even if you have a line that has low ridership, if you have some people on that line for whom that bus is the only way they can get to work, particularly in the healthcare industry, in the restaurant industry, and all these areas that have been hit so hard by the pandemic, uh, you know, one thing I would propose is to contract out the operation of those lines to companies where you could use a van, something that looks more the size of a ride van, say, or something like that, which are dramatically less expensive to run than the MBTA 40-foot buses. T does this for some sort of isolated lines that it runs, and the cost is about half as operating the big buses. So I think, if we really need to try to be able to connect these folks with their livelihood and with roles that we as a society need these people to play. And I think that those are a couple things that could save money and stave off some of these cuts.
When it comes to bus maintenance, I think the T under a previous GM reported some savings about, I think, in 2017 for a while. Did that turn out to be just non-sustainable, or is there something really structural about the way the T does
Yeah,
maintenance?
frankly, what happened is, as I said, they don't have the software. They don't. They don't have any standard repair times. This kind of stuff isn't allowed in the contract. And the other thing that is really makes it very expensive is that there is that if you're a supervisor, you can't pick up a wrench. It's prohibited by the contract. So this stuff just really is untenable. And what happened was, to be perfectly frank, Chris, is that the T proposed doing this, but the 264, the machinists union, made it clear that they were going to make life untenable for any company that bid, and so every company except one who had expressed interest in bidding backed out.
Right. By the way, I know reforming this could take a while. So, I mean, if you need to do something quick, this might not be a quick enough fix. But what about other things that T needs to do going forward to meet the mindset of the riders in the future?
Well, some things that are that riders will see directly, other things that will free up money that will allow them to do what we need to do. The T needs to the greatest degree possible, take a customer service kind of approach, where customers are number one. I think that you need to have some sort of a customer bill of rights where you have things like, consistent Wi-Fi, on-time performance, things like that. And you put it up, and you have goals, and you make very transparent progress toward those goals, things like that. But other things that really would provide, that would free up funding. Look, the Exhibit A is the MBTA pension, which is just out of control. It is essentially bankrupt. It requires the employees to pay in less and provides benefits that are far richer than state employees. And it's completely untenable. It's essentially bankrupt, and it just needs, things like that need to be fixed, because, the reality is, in the last few years before the pandemic, we saw a dramatic increase, particularly in the capital budget of the T, really sort of fixing things, getting them up to speed. And that needs to continue. I mean, we're going to need to spend more money on the T. And if we're going to be able to do that and continue to do that in an era where that's going to be absolutely critical because of climate change, among other things, you can't ask taxpayers and riders to pay, twice as much. And I'm not doing one of these things like a lot of people do, where you say, oh, well, unless it's done perfectly, you can't do it. To be honest with you, my goal, what I would be thrilled at, would be for the T to run the same way as other, basically inefficient government agencies run. The T is not even close to running that well. And they have made progress since 2015, but it's really important that that progress continues, particularly in an era when the MBTA, which is already critical to the regional economy, is going to become even more important.
What about other revenue sources that might help? In 2014, we voted to cap or even roll back a bit the increase in the gas tax, but we've had some fare increases in the interim. Isn't there something else that can be done to at least
Yeah, I
solve
mean, look,
part of
what I
this?
would like to see is, ideally, I would like to see in the short term, I would like to see these reforms paired with a modern, a moderate gas tax increase. I think that if we handle this right, it should be the last time that we would have to raise the gas tax, because I think going forward, if you look back even to 2007 with the state's Transportation Finance Commission, pretty much everybody who's looked at this agrees that over the long term, electronic tolling revenue is really a critical source for transportation revenue for all modes of transportation. And what needs to be done is that we need to make this fair. In other words, that you pay a small amount every time, whether it's vehicle miles traveled or wherever you're on a highway, and it needs to apply the same to everybody, not the way it is now, where you pay if you're coming from the west on the Pike, but you don't pay from the north, and you don't pay from the south. A fair kind of user fee like electronic tolling, I think, is really the fairest way and the most efficient way to raise money for transportation.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Yes, and you too, Charlie Chieppo from the Pioneer Institute.